In the last lecture, we saw that what new products are coming out of biotechnology. Today, we are going to see that what are the historical roots of biotechnology. There is a grave misconception that people have started to use microorganisms very recently. But if we go back in history, what we see is that even in 6000 BC, यानी हजरत ईसा की पैदाइश से 6000 साल कबल भी people were using yeast to ferment beer, and they had some idea that there is a difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So Egyptians were using anaerobic respiration of yeast to leaven bread and use mold to flavor cheese. So in front of you, you have an image. On the left hand side, what you see is एक ताजा गूंधा हुआ आटा है. It's a dough which has been freshly made. लेकिन अगर उसके अंदर yeast add कर दिया जाए तो what you see after a few days वो इस तरह फूल जाता है. Today, when you eat pizza, when you eat naan, when you eat several sort of bread, we are using fermented dough for it. And is there an advantage to it? Yes, definitely. For the people who are eating these sort of bread, it's very easier to digest. And the sort of problems that we see with gluten intolerance today, people who use these breads actually get them less as compared to the people who use non-fermented dough. And in this image, what you see is that there is an evidence that when in Egypt they excavated various areas, they found these sort of figurines which were showing bread making process at a larger scale. So there is a very interesting case in front of us. Even in 350 BC, people developed various sort of pregnancy tests. So in today's world, when a woman gets pregnant, we will take her to a hospital where she will get an ultrasound scan, and then you would be able to tell where, even in the third trimester, whether it's a male baby or a female baby. But in those days, obviously there was no ultrasound. How could we tell? So they made a very interesting, you can call a biosensor. So if a pregnant woman would urinate on barley seeds, and if it grows, it would be a male child. And if that woman or any woman, pregnant woman, pees on wheat, and if the wheat grows, it would be a female child. Now, this test, whether it was a witchcraft or true, a team of scientists tried to prove it or disprove it. In 1963, they carried out this test, and what they found out that 70% of the time this test worked. And you can attribute this difference in wheat or barley seeds to the elevated levels of estrogen. And this is one example where we see that people who were living without the modern means, they had some sort of mechanisms to use live forms to do these sort of analysis. What you watch here is basically wheat, barley, rye, and oats. By 400 BC, people started to use salts to prevent food. यानी pickling का process start हो गया, pretty much the way we make pickles today. Now, we cannot say for certainty that these people understood that there are microorganisms inside the food and they are making it go bad. But what they got the gist of it, कि अगर हम लोग salt से prevent नहीं करेंगे, तो ultimately food will go bad. Now we know that what are hypertonic, hypotonic or isotonic solutions. And in future lectures we will discuss these processes in detail. लेकिन तब तक लोगों को इतना जरूर आइडिया हो गया था कि there is something inside the food. Then European dark period came and various libraries were closed, and subsequently Islamic golden era began. But because alcohol is prohibited in Islam, there was less progress on the front of wine development. And somehow earlier period of biotechnology was associated with with the development of beer or wine. Ab Suddenly, by 1665, people started to develop lenses. And what we saw, that the first interesting book on microorganisms came out by Robert Hooke in 1665. And this is what you are watching on the screen is the title of that book, Micrographia, or some descriptions of minute bodies made by magnifying glasses. So you can see that this was the first bestseller which was scientific in its content. And subsequently, what we also saw, that Antony van Leeuwenhoek, who was a very fine lens maker, we consider him father of microbiology. So this guy observed for the first time microscopic single-celled organisms. He made around 200 microscopes in that day and around 500 lenses with various magnifications, which was so fine that it was in 1957 a scientist named C.L. Strong was able to replicate it. People tried various ways कि हम शीशे को इस तरह तराशें, इस तरह crush करें, but ultimately they realized that if we join various pieces of lenses, then we can make such nice lenses. Ultimately, limelight में आ गया by 1680, 1690, and people started to accept it कि there are microorganisms. इसके साथ साथ जैसे ही लोगों ने देखा कि माइक्रो ऑर्गेनिजम्स एग्जिस्ट करते हैं, people also started to challenge what we used to call vitalism. So the belief was that all living things have some sort of vital energy which flows through them, and that's why they are alive. And second, no organic compound can be synthesized in the lab. So when Frederick Wöhler synthesized urea, basically it was considered refutation of vitalism, and people started to believe, okay, living beings also work under some sort of chemical or physical principles. Here comes a very interesting guy, Theodor Schwann, and he gave cell theory, which stated as all living things are composed of cells and cell products. So people in those times, people were just digesting that organic compounds can be synthesized. Theodor Schwann comes along and says that all living things are composed of cells and cell products. His career was very brief. He only worked actively in life sciences for 5 years, because the guy I earlier presented, Frederick Wöhler, basically they believed in chemistry, and what they believed was कि ये जो yeast भी ferment हो रही है, there is this reaction of some compounds in fruit juices with nitrogenous compounds, and ultimately yeast beer हो रही है. So they were not very happy with this idea कि suddenly we are saying that there are these living beings inside those juices which are producing beer. The cartoon you are watching was actually, they wanted to ridicule Theodor Schwann, and they said that yeasts are peeing beer out, and basically they killed Theodor Schwann's career. It was a very sad incident. But somehow Theodor Schwann ये establish कर गया कि it's the microorganisms which live in these fruit juices and ultimately act. And then people came along like Rudolf Virchow, who basically gave this idea, omnis cellula e cellula, that every cell arises from another cell. And this laid the foundation of biotechnology, that all life is composed of microorganisms or cells, and ultimately, if we start playing around with these cells, we might be able to get out some products. Thank you.